Hello and welcome to the Arise interview, where we take time to reflect on the big stories from the news and on the fortunes and affairs of the world in an hour of conversation with commentators, analysts and thought leaders. I'm Charles Anyekolu. Coming up in the next 60 minutes, Donald Trump and the US Republican Party are escalating their claims of election fraud. In the latest developments, the US Attorney General William Barr has taken the unusual step of authorizing an investigation into what he called any substantial allegations of fraud, though he stressed that his team has not yet uncovered any irregularities. An advisor to the president-elect, Joe Biden, accused Mr. Barr of fueling claims which were being laughed out of court. So what can Mr. Biden and the Democrats do now to move the transition forward in the face of the overwhelming threat from Donald Trump and the Republican Party? We'll hear from the Democrats and the Republicans. And later, as leaders across Africa congratulate Joe Biden for his election victory, and with many expressing hope that the Biden-Harris presidency will boost ties between the continent and the US, we ask, what could a Biden presidency mean for African countries, and how much substantive change and difference can we expect from what prevailed with the Trump administration? We're in Washington to speak to a lawyer and co-chair of African Women for Biden, and member of the steering committee of the African Diaspora for Biden-Harris. Coming up. So William Barr, the US Attorney General, unusually and controversially wades into the election results strife, threatening to drag the country's Department of Justice into a highly partisan election battle. And already his move has claimed its first scalp. The department's head of the Elections Crimes Unit, Richard Pilger, has resigned in protest, calling the Attorney General's action an abrogation of established policy in regard to elections in America. Meanwhile, Joe Biden has been going about building his administration, assembling teams of experts to fight the coronavirus, and considering taking legal action over a federal agency's delay in recognizing his victory. Donald Trump, in contrast, has remained locked down in the White House, apart from a couple of appearances to play rounds of golf at the weekend. But clearly he's planning his legal strategy and has been tweeting furiously. And yesterday, in the latest sign of turbulence in his administration, Mr. Trump fired, or rather in his words, terminated, the services of his Defense Secretary Mark Esper, who is rumored to have crossed the president on a number of issues. So more gut-churning uncertainty in America and no sign of an end in sight.
Indeed, some of the final tabulations are not yet complete. It is still to be determined which party will hold a majority in this chamber. But we do know a few things. First, and most importantly, former Vice President Joseph Robinette Biden will become the 46th President of the United States. Our dear colleague, the distinguished Senator from California, Kamala Harris, will be the next Vice President of the United States. And on January 20th, the country will finally turn the page on one of the most divisive and chaotic chapters in our history. Now, I must spend a moment on something that will garner too much attention over the next few weeks. Baseless claims by the president and his supporters that there's been widespread voter fraud and that the election was somehow rigged or stolen from President Trump. That kind of rhetoric is extremely dangerous, extremely poisonous to our democracy. As in any campaign, the president has a right to bring legal challenges or request recounts where state law allows. However, there is no legal right to file frivolous claims. Lawsuits must have basis in facts, in evidence. And make no mistake, there has been no evidence of any significant widespread voter fraud.
That's Chuck Schumer, who is a senior U.S. Democrats there. And our analysis begins with the Democrats. We'll speak to a Republican later in the program. But first, to Bill Barnard, who is a senior member of the U.S. Democratic Party and spokesman for Democrats abroad. Good to see you again, Bill. You don't look as jolly as you normally look. I suppose things are not quite going the way that Democrats like yourself expected them to go in America.
Well, I'm very pleased that we took the presidency. We didn't do as well down ballot as we had hoped, but nonetheless, we've taken the presidency. We will retain the House and have gained at least one in the Senate and may gain two more depending upon how things go in Georgia. So we don't know yet, but what's disturbing at the moment is, in fact, what the president and Bill Barr are doing.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. I mean, Bill Barr deciding to allow federal prosecutors to conduct inquiries into any specific allegations of voter fraud before the results of the presidential race are certified. I mean, what's your reaction to that?
You know, I think we ought to realize, first of all, that what appears to be on the surface in capitals like Washington is not always really what's going on. And we ought to pay attention to that here. And sometimes you have to parse the words that are put out in press releases very carefully to be sure you understand exactly what's happened. The only change that has been made is that investigations could begin if the local U.S. attorney feels, in the district U.S. attorney feels that there's substantial evidence of something wrong. The only change is that it will begin. In the past, it always began after certification, after the final vote was in. This time he's authorizing it, Bill Barr is, ahead of time. But pay attention to the language. It has to be clear and apparently credible allegations of irregularities that, if true, could potentially impact the outcome of a federal election in an individual state. And then he goes on to say, serious allegations should be handled with great care, but specious, speculative, fanciful, or far-fetched claims should not be a basis for initiating federal inquiries. Nothing here should be taken as an indication that the department has concluded that voting irregularities have impacted the outcome of any election. Well, it may very well be that, first of all, Barr may have wanted to appease the president by doing something. But on the other hand, if we had all these rumors and all the rest and speculations that are in these baseless lawsuits, these frivolous lawsuits that have been brought and dismissed already in Georgia, in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, we might have a couple of weeks of that going on until the final certifications. Most certifications take place as late as early December, some in late November, depending upon state law. So we might have had all the speculation out there before any U.S. district attorney could make a statement whether or not something was seriously under investigation. But now they can make statements ahead of time. It may very well be that this was, on the one hand, a desire to appease the president, do something he would like, and yet on the other hand, as U.S. attorneys do not bring any such actions before certification, lay to rest the notion that there's anything seriously wrong with this election, as there is not. There's not a single whit of serious evidence that would affect the outcome that has been produced.
Well, absolutely. But the problem is that the more this goes on, the more it begins to, in the minds of people, erode the legitimacy of a vote that was clearly won fair and square. And the more it empowers the detractors and those who support Donald Trump. I mean, he's planning on going out and holding rallies and all the rest of it. The more it supports it and makes Joe Biden look sort of weak. I mean, the Attorney General, William Barr, has often been accused of having an overly cozy relationship with Donald Trump. I mean, does this latest move by Mr. Barr further support that accusation?
Well, I think it does in one sense, but as I say, there may be something more going on here. Maybe that Barr is trying to give the president and his supporters time to come to the realization that there is nothing there. Unless there's, we'll just have to see if any local district attorneys, U.S. attorneys in the districts bring any cases. None have done so thus far. The cases that have been brought thus far have been brought by members of the campaign and the rest, and they've been dismissed out of hand. The only serious case is the one in Pennsylvania, which will not affect the outcome, and which is based on a question that the Supreme Court asked of who has the power to change voting regulations, the state legislature or the state Supreme Court. That's a serious question, and it's a serious case, and it will be heard, but it does not affect the outcome of the election one whit.
Well, I mean, what I'm wondering is, because obviously this is having an effect, at the very least psychologically, on people, not just in America, but around the world. I mean, are we likely to see more public pressure from the Biden team on the White House and the Republican Party to do the right thing, for example, and move the transition forward? Because, I mean, they're fighting you on several fronts. I mean, because so far, I mean, your party appears, the president-elect appears to be adopting a softly approach and sort of extending and almost accepting this so-called lame duck period.
I don't think that's necessarily true. I mean, what is really becoming serious are two things. One, under American law, there is a process of transition. The General Services Administration, which is headed by a Trump appointee, has to certify that a transition has begun. And that releases certain funds that the Biden people can use to fund the transition efforts. It also gives certain access to what's going on in the various departments to the incoming administration. Now, that has not been done. And that is really shameful that it has not been done. There is the possibility of court action to require it to be done. That's one worrisome thing, because one thing we want is a smooth transition, no interruption in the operation of the government, particularly facing the kinds of problems that we face both domestically, economically, and in the pandemic and abroad. The other thing that's most worrisome is what's happening in terms of intelligence. Thus far, Biden is not receiving, as any incoming president normally would, the daily intelligence briefings, the same one that the president gets. That starts immediately when we have a known victor. That's not being done, which means that there is a serious possibility that there is information that's not being shared, especially given the kind of attitude that the Trump administration has taken towards the intelligence services throughout, where he's often been willing to take the word of Vladimir Putin over his own intelligence services at home. So those are two.
Right. Okay. We lost you momentarily there, Bill. I'm just trying to see if you're still there. Of course. Just a final question. I mean, how unusual is all this in sort of a U.S. transition period when an outgoing president is handing over to an incoming successor? Because up till now, the Trump administration is yet to initiate the transition process that will ensure a smooth handover of power. And we've got about a minute.
It is extraordinarily unusual. I mean, if you look at the past transitions, Republicans and Democrats have gone out of their way to make it smooth, to make it efficient, to make sure that it was set in process so that the incoming administration would not be hampered either in dealing with foreign policy, international policy, or domestic policy at home. So it is truly unusual, but it is unfortunate. It's not particularly surprising given the record of this particular president and the character of this president, but nonetheless, one hopes that it comes to an end fairly soon.
Okay, Bill, thank you very much indeed. We appreciate the time you've taken to talk to us. Bill Barnard is a spokesman for Democrats abroad and a senior member of the U.S. Democratic Party. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as controversy continues to swirl around the results of the U.S. presidential election. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Zaniagolu, and it is fair to say that no U.S. election in living memory has been so closely watched as this one, with more and more people coming away bewildered at the complexity of the American electoral system. But even more than the spectacle, Americans and the world have been rapt by the aftermath and the disastrous implications for the U.S.'s reputation in the world as Donald Trump attempts to rob Joe Biden of his victory, as one international analyst put it. In the latest move, the U.S. Attorney General William Barr has taken the highly unusual step of authorizing federal prosecutors to investigate possible irregularities in the presidential ballot. His move follows days of unremitting attacks on the election process from Donald Trump and his supporters in the Republican Party.
Majority Leader is recognized.
There's one aspect of last week that has gotten lost that I want to single out right at the start. By every indication, the 2020 election appears to have been free from meaningful foreign interference. There is no suggestion that our foreign adversaries were allowed to undermine the integrity of our process. According to the director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Administration, quote, "We have no evidence any foreign adversary was capable of preventing Americans from voting or changing vote tallies," end quote. According to preliminary results, voters across the nation elected and re-elected Republican senators to a degree that actually stunned prognosticators. Likewise, the American people seem to have reacted to House Democrats' radicalism and obstruction by shrinking the Speaker's majority and electing more Republicans. And then there's the presidential race. Obviously, no states have yet certified their election results. We have at least one or two states that are already on track for a recount. And I believe the president may have legal challenges underway in at least 5 states.
That's Mitch McConnell there. Well, our comprehensive coverage of the U.S. election and its aftermath continues now as we attempt to look at the latest developments from the Republican perspective. And joining me for that is the Republican strategist Gregg Swenson, who is also a partner at the Brigg Macadam Investment Bank. Good to see you once again, Greg. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. And this move by William Barr is controversial because traditionally voter irregularities are resolved in America at state level, in addition to the fact that there's no credible evidence of voter fraud, according to election monitors, both Republican and Democrat. So Mr. Barr's move likely now to drag the Department of Justice into a highly partisan election battle.
Well, I think Barr is very much a by-the-book attorney general. And look, I think the fact that he wants investigations from the federal level doesn't surprise me. And, you know, if you look at, granted, you know, the states are the ones who actually run the elections locally, but the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment is important to consider. So from a federal level, it's ultimately up to the federal government and the attorney general to monitor these things, just like in any other issue, to make sure there's been no violations of that clause. So I guess I wasn't too surprised that Attorney General Barr did that, and as you saw in the comments from Mitch McConnell, is also, you know, while partisan, he's also very much a by-the-book legislator. So these things didn't surprise me. I think their view is to let the electoral process run its course, wait until the results are certified and the legal challenges are resolved, and then certify the election, which is expected in a few weeks on December 8th.
Well, I mean, what is extraordinary about all this, Greg, you know, if for anybody who's got any knowledge, legal knowledge, and the way the American legal system operates, I mean, you know, there's been no evidence put forward. All the cases so far that have been taken to court by the Republican Party, by the Trump campaign team, they've lost. I mean, they've put in about 12 to 20 of those, and every single one of them they have lost. And so it's very unusual in those circumstances where no evidence exists for the federal government to come out and say, go ahead and, I mean, look under the sort of the table and the corners and under stones and things to see if you'll find any evidence. I mean, it just appears as though, you know, Joe Biden may have won the election, but it is still Donald Trump's America, as one columnist put it.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a couple of points you made. One is about the evidence. There's plenty of evidence. I just don't know that the evidence is material enough in terms of the number of votes that would be overturned to change the outcome, at least the numbers that we've seen so far. But again, the media's job is to call the election. It's not to actually certify or declare the winner. It's just an estimate. And typically that estimate is spot on, because normally elections are not that close. But as you saw, you know, in 2000, where it was close, there are times that are very unusual. And I think we're seeing one of those right now. But I wouldn't say that there's no evidence. It's just a matter of letting letting the investigations conclude. And I think that's better for not just for Americans, I mean, not just for Republicans, but I think it's better for all Americans, and even the Democrats, and especially Vice President Biden. If he does end up being certified the winner, then, you know, we would hope that there could be some clarity around the process and give him more confidence and more of a mandate, so there aren't things that come out in February or March, like we saw in the last administration, where the Russia collusion hoax was really hampered him in his first 2 years in office. So I think, you know, it's better to just be patient, as Vice President Biden said last Tuesday. Let the system work. These things aren't necessary in most elections, but I think in this case, you have half the population that is really suspicious or uncomfortable with the voting process and the potential irregularities and potential fraud. So, I mean, look, I think it's better I mean, we all want this thing to be over with quickly, but I also think it's important to make sure that everything, you know, the electoral process runs its course before the certifications are made.
Well, I mean, what's interesting about what you say, Greg, is that you personally sound very measured and very reasonable, but that's not the way a lot of other Republicans are coming across. I'm sorry to say that, because I mean, we're seeing Republicans, for example, calling on the Republican, I must emphasize, Secretary of State in Georgia to resign, ostensibly because he didn't conduct a free and fair election, when in fact that's what he did. And they've offered no evidence to support their call for him to resign.
Yeah, I haven't followed Georgia that well. I do think, you know, you have a point, but let's wait till the evidence is shown. You know, right now there's not a pile of evidence because the investigations haven't concluded. There's lots of little incidents of evidence, and I've seen them and they're real. But again, I'm not sure it moves the needle. And yes, I try to be measured. I think Bill and I have been on media together a lot in the last 10 days. I think it's wise to dial down the rhetoric. Don't let the extreme rhetoric on either side, you know, get you too excited. Try to be calm. I think it's an important time to be calm. You know, I'm thrilled that there's been no violence since the election, no meaningful, you know, riots or looting. You know, I hope that everybody can stay calm and just let the process work. And if Attorney General Barr, you know, thinks that it's important because he's seen, you know, some evidence or some indications of improprieties, you know, let's let them play out and make sure that the process works. There's a reason why it's a very deliberate process. You know, not until December 8th, you know, do we have the safe harbor deadline. Not until December 14th is when the electors vote. And so, you know, we saw this in 2000. It's designed well that way. And even though in 2000 you had front page of the newspapers on December 6th or November 6th or November 7th in 2000 with President Gore on the front page, you know, I think maybe we're jumping the gun a little bit. I just think it would be wise for everybody to just, you know, relax and be patient.
Okay, Greg, as always, we appreciate your measured and reasonable response. Gregg Swenson is a Republican strategist and partner at the Brigg Macadam Investment Bank.